Hello everyone, this is Nitesh, and we are here for some Magic the Gathering deck tech. So, the deck we're talking about today is Black-Green Dredge in Standard. This is a deck that I've had a good bit of decent success with, so I kind of want to talk about it a little. Now, I tried doing a unboxing video, and the low quality of my camera really messed it up. So instead, today I'm just gonna talk about the cards, and I've got some extra space like over here. I'll just, when I'm doing the editing, I'll put the cards like right somewhere in this area. But let's jump right in with some of the major players. First and foremost, we've got one of my favorite cards in Standard, Deathrite Shaman. This thing is incredible. Like, if you want to make an opponent start squirming like turn 1, drop a Deathrite Shaman. They can't play the game without playing into it. They need to stop it right there. It cannot continue to live. But if they do keep it alive, this is a deck that's going to just keep feeding it and just keep supplementing it. You mill out your lands, and you get to take back the mana from it. You use up spells milling yourself. You get to use your spells again to keep the opponent on a clock. If you really need the extra life, you can just start eating up the opponent's creatures. It's just a perfect utility card, and I consider it one of the most underrated cards in Standard right now. Then, let's move on to the stuff that actually uses the stuff in your graveyard. We have got Night Howler, which is, again, pretty underrated card. But, I mean, it's a little more understandable in Night Howler's case, because it is possible to not play into it. That card really only fits in this sort of a deck. But in this deck, it is a killer. We've got Nemesis of Mortals. Not a lot to say there. In this deck, this is a great undercosted creature. If you want to get a creature on the field, power it up before the opponent even really knows how to deal with it, Nemesis of Mortals is what you want. Then we've got one of the big game enders in this deck, Carad, Golgari Lich Lord. Now, this is a card that you don't have to worry about accidentally milling out, because you could just take him right back. And when you power up your creatures based on how much stuff you've got in your graveyard, Carad really helps you get some use out of it. Then we've got the enablers. The stuff that you use to actually fill up your graveyard. The two most important ones are Grisly Salvage and Satyr Wayfinder. Both for pretty much the same reason. The one thing that can really mess you up is if you're just going through, dredging out, and milling yourself, and then you end up losing because you just don't have the mana to play anything. These two cards let you actually grab lands instead of just forcing you to toss them away. You're still probably going to end up tossing them away, but Grisly Salvage and Satyr Wayfinder make it a lot more bearable. Satyr Wayfinder also has the advantage of being a creature. So, you can just throw a Night Howler onto it. You can just start swinging with it and keeping the opponent from getting too comfortable. Anyway, we've also got Commune with the Gods. Honestly, that's the one that I'm starting to like a bit less. Nothing really against it, but that makes the 14th self-milling card. But sometimes the game just comes down to how much stuff can I fill up my graveyard with. How can I really use this deck's strategy to its best potential? And Commune with the Gods certainly does that. What I might end up doing, though, I might end up replacing that with Kruphix's Insight. I'm not a huge fan, but Kruphix's Insight, it lets you grab more if you have the stuff, and it lets you mill a little bit more. You know, might just be a slight improvement, but it is still an improvement. Then we have got Lotleth Troll, which is another all-star in this deck. This thing, Lotleth Troll, is incredibly good in this. First off, it practically never dies. Oh, you're going to hear his downfall? Regenerate it. Supreme Verdict? Regenerate it. Oh, and now I'm going to just attack with it. It's a 2-1. You're going to block? Regenerate. And now I'm going to discard my whole hand full of creatures, pump him up, and he's just going to wreck your creature. But we've also got Drown in Filth. It's another self-milling card, and it actually fills a spot that was sorely lacking with this deck. This deck has very little removal. So, if opponent's got a creature you don't want to deal with, you can't really do much about it. But in addition to Drown in Filth, you do also have Shadowborn Demon, but I'm only running 2 of them in here, just because I can't always count on playing him, and I would kind of much rather use that space, not just for cards that are a little more low cost, but also the kind of cards that actually use the graveyard a little bit more, or help me fill it up a little more. But then there's 7 more non-land cards in the main deck, and it's 3 Elvish Mystics, just for a little bit extra green mana, and 4 Voyaging Satyrs. I will be honest, I'm not too sure about these Voyaging Satyrs. It's nice to have the mana, because this deck doesn't really run a lot of it. But in the end, it kind of feels like I'm not really getting that much out of Voyaging Satyr. But, a lot of other lists run Sylvan Carad instead of Voyaging Satyr. I was going to do that, but really, sometimes you can only get like a couple of creatures out, and if one of them has Defender and isn't going to be attacking anyone, that becomes a lot less useful. You know, I would much rather have a Voyaging Satyr, which in the worst case scenario, I can still attack with it, rather than a Sylvan Carad who's just going to sit there until it dies. Now, moving on to the land base, there's not a lot to say. You know, it's a black-green deck, so we got the full 4 Overgrown Tombs. I only have one Temple of Malady in here, and it's not just a matter of I only have the one, though I do, but it's also a matter of if I put more of them in there. Yeah, I would kind of have a better distribution with my mana, but on the other hand, that would be a lot of land just coming in tapped, and that would make it a lot less useful. One of the strengths of this deck is it just comes right in and could just come in swinging. Then you got, of course, Forests and Swamps, but I also run 2 Rogue's Passage. Seems like an odd thing to include in here, but there have been times where this deck just gets stalled out by just not being able to get through. Like, Elspeth, Sun's Champion, that thing just keeps making the 1/1 tokens, and I can have a gigantic Nemesis of Mortals and a gigantic pumped up Night Howler, but if I can't actually get through, then, you know, that's not gonna help. But in terms of the main board, the one thing that I am a little iffy on is the Voyaging Satyrs, just because I usually end up just discarding them. Like, the Voyaging Satyrs and Elvish Mystic spend more time in my graveyard than actually on the field. Granted, that applies to a lot of this deck, but I really don't use them that much. But that's it for the main board. Let's talk about the sideboard a bit, because the sideboard is actually really kind of hard to work out. I mean, honestly, there have been a bunch of times where I just haven't bothered using the sideboard. You know, the last time I played this at F&M, I didn't sideboard at all. And, you know, it's really kind of varied. I have Vraska the Unseen and Herald of Torment. A lot of deck lists for this have a bunch of Herald of Torments in the main deck. I looked at that and I kind of considered it, but really, Herald of Torment doesn't do enough for you to run main deck. Like, yeah, you can bestow it on something and attack in the air, but Rogue's Passage lets me do mostly the same thing, except a little more, well, a little better, because we're talking about unblockable instead of just flying. And Rogue's Passage doesn't really distract the deck from what it's trying to do. Vraska it's just there for if I really need to kill certain things. Like if I'm playing against a really Planeswalker heavy deck, I can board in Vraska and just keep taking out Planeswalkers while still playing my creatures. Also got 2 Thoughtseizes, you know, just because if I'm up against an aggressive deck, the one thing that I really need it to do is run out of steam right when I'm getting moving. Like, when I can get Nemesis of Mortals, Night Howler, Lotleth Troll, when I can get that stuff out, that can really just stop an aggressive deck. But if it takes me a while to get that to happen, then an aggressive deck is just going to run me over. So, just Thoughtseize out a couple of creatures, and I only have 2 of them in here because I get the feeling in the worst case I'm only going to need 1. Then we've got Golgari Charm, which that's probably one of the better charms out there. Like, I'm mainly going to be using it for enchantment removal. So, you're going to Detention Sphere my Night Howler. Okay, Golgari Charm, get rid of it. You're gonna play an Underworld Connections, so you can just build up your devotion. Golgari Charm, get rid of it. Same goes with the next card in this sideboard, Abrupt Decay. Like, when you really think about it, so many of the threats in today's standard are 3 mana cost or less. Detention Sphere, Nightveil Spectre, Underworld Connections. You know, Abrupt Decay can take care of all that. Whip of Erebos, I only have 1 of them in the sideboard because I'm not really sure how much I'm actually going to use it. We've got 2 Mistcutter Hydras, just because if I manage to actually get the mana for them, I can just bestow a Night Howler onto them and just destroy a blue deck right there. Just end blue devotion right there just by pumping it up with Night Howler. Or, against a control deck, bestow it with Night Howler, start swinging. The only answer they have for it is a Supreme Verdict, and if they do that, I get to keep my Night Howler. Then we've got 2 Heroes Downfall. You know, it's kind of self-explanatory. Sometimes I'm going to run into stuff that Drown in Filth is just not going to be able to deal with. I don't really have that much trouble with Desecration Demon, which, you know, that is one of the big dominant forces in Standard right now. But I don't really have that much trouble with him. But, you know, if I do end up dealing with something that I'm not quite able to deal with, I do have the Heroes Downfalls in the sideboard. And Lifebane Zombies. 2 of them in the sideboard. I don't know how much of a big thing White Devotion is going to be. It's got plenty of tools right now. But if it becomes a big enough thing, Lifebane Zombie is just going to end games. First off, I get to take a creature. Second off, you can't stop me from hitting you. Third off, bestow Night Howler. I filled up my graveyard. It's on something that you cannot stop. And, you know, good luck trying to deal with that. So, this is a deck that has been very successful for me. You know, I play this at F&M, and I can usually win the entire night with no sideboarding, which that is a kind of incredible thing to brag. But in terms of stuff that might be changing, I'm still kind of figuring out like what changes I want to make to it. It's kind of hard to work with that when, you know, it's kind of hard to figure out what you need to change when you're going 5-0, and you're not losing in a way that teaches you anything. But the green-black god Pharika she gets a lot of flack for not being that great, especially compared with some of the other gods. And in a lot of ways, this is a deck that doesn't even want to see that god. This is a deck that does not want to empty out its graveyard. It wants to fill it up and just use the stuff while it's there. But I'm kind of holding off on my final judgment with that, because for all I know, she is going to end up being incredible in this once we lose all of our Return to Ravnica stuff. Because really, when the next block starts and stuff rotates out, I'm losing most of this whole deck. So at that point, this deck is going to have to go through some massive changes. And so I'm kind of holding off on my final judgment on Pharika until after that happens, because for all I know, once Return to Ravnica cycles out, she's going to be one of the best things that still uses that still uses the graveyard. So anyway, that is today's Magic the Gathering deck tech. This is Nitesh. Enjoy the videos and subscribe to see more. I will see you guys later.